How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Keeping the Faith podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Fuentes. This is my co-host, Edgar Martinez.
Hello.
We want to thank you guys so much for checking out another episode of Keeping the Faith podcast. Just a quick reminder that you guys can catch us on Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else where you can find podcasts. Today, we're actually be talking about another argument for the existence of God. This one is actually a very good one that I enjoy a lot. It's called the fine-tuning argument, but I just wanted to let you guys know that so you guys know what this episode's about. One last reminder that you guys can actually find us on Facebook as well at Keeping the Faith Podcast. Go ahead and leave us a like there and let us know of any questions that you guys may have, or just, like it for Bible updates every now and then. All right. Well, with that all said, we're going to go ahead and take it away, and I'm actually going to throw it over to Edgar so he can explain this or introduce it.
Yeah, so this is another argument for God that we want to present, and of course you can always check this out in a different article. Maybe if you want to get a more extensive information or more extensive explanation, you can always do so. I don't know, maybe one of the articles, and actually we'll put the articles in the description box just so that you can maybe check those out, a few that we have. But as far as this one, like Jonah said, this is a fine tuning of the universe, and this is one that it's kind of sort of popular in both ways. One either for God, and the other one, of a few atheists that are against it and have a few arguments against this fine-tuning argument. But basically, what it says is that there's certain parameters in the universe that are already set. So, such as like gravity, that if you were to change just, a fraction of it, it would pretty much, destroy life. There's much more. There's a lot more that have been set to a certain extent, a certain parameter, that it is why we know that life was formed. And so, there's things like, the heat of the sun, the space, and a lot more. So it is important to know this, because it's not just something that was some random number, and this is one of the arguments or one of the theories about the Big Bang, that it just blew up, and by random chance we got to all these precise numbers that are giving us life, that we're able to enjoy a life in this universe. But we have to remember that, for the most part, explosions create chaos, not order. And so this is that argument of that fine tuning, that the numbers that were inserted, it's in a form, not as a random form, but in a form that these numbers were precisely put to give us life. So that's one of the argument, one of the things of this argument, and of course we'll hear a lot of arguments. One of them being the multiverse. I know Jonah touched that in our previous episode about the multiverse, being different layers, and so, but I think this actually raises more questions with the multiverse, or trying to explain that with that multiverse, that we have more, multiverses. Maybe there's someone else, around in a different in a different universe that, it's a copy of you. But with this multiverse, I think you have to explain even more, because now you gotta explain a fine-tuning for each one of these universes for in order for them to come into existence. So I think it raises more questions in it's a lot more difficult to try and explain something like this. And of course, there's no proof, there's no evidence for such a thing as a multiverse. This is just a theory. This is just an imagination that they want to bring up. And so that's just a fraction of that fine tuning. I don't know. Do you have something else that you would want to add, Jonah? I know this is an extensive topic, but as we said, we just want to bring up a few major points of this argument.
Yeah, no, of course. I think you actually said it all. So let's go ahead and end the episode here. Thank you guys so much for watching the episode.
Of course.
I'm just kidding. No, the one thing I really like about this argument is that even though we don't really need it specifically, a lot of times when you're talking about evidence for God, people always bring up the idea of science. Like, oh, well, I want hard, cold science to prove the existence of God. And, that's a whole different discussion by itself about why science isn't even built to be able to prove something supernatural. But I think as far as when it does come to science, the fine-tuning argument is probably as close as we can get, and it's good science too. It's all about cosmology. It's all about, like how you were saying earlier, very fine structured numbers that have to be set to a certain nth degree in order for life to even exist. And when we say life, we're not talking about human life. We're talking about any sort of life at its natural, at the foundation. Cells. The universe has to have these constants that are so precise just to be able to have living cells exist in the universe. So that's literally how far we have to take this. We're not talking about human life. We're talking about life in general. Here I have one article that actually talks about the cosmological context, which is actually the expansion speed of the universe and how fast it grows. It says this. It says the cosmological constant refers to the balance of the attractive force of gravity with a hypothesized repulsive force of space observed only at very large size scales. It must be very close to zero, that is, these two forces must be nearly perfectly balanced. To get the right balance, the cosmological constant must be fine-tuned to something like 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. If it were just slightly more positive, the universe would fly apart. Slightly negative, the universe would collapse. So here we're talking about how gravity has to be balanced to 1 part in the 120th power. So that's 0.0 with 120 zeros, 1. That if the cosmological constant was any stronger, the universe would collapse within each other, and if the universe was any weaker, it would not be strong enough where everything would start flying apart. These are some really small numbers. I wish I had more examples to compare it to, but when you actually look at how small this number is, it blows our mind because we can't even fathom it. Some other interesting facts about the cosmological, or not the cosmological argument, about the fine-tuning argument is how, this is one that I've heard all my life growing up, and I never really knew if it was true until, we start looking into the fine-tuning argument, which is the idea that if the Earth was even an inch closer to the sun, we would burn up and we wouldn't be able to exist because it'd be too hot. And if the Earth was 1 inch further away from the, or at least the orbit, if it was 1 inch further away from the sun, we would freeze. Think about the perfect orbital axis that, I don't even know if I said that right, the perfect orbit that the Earth has to be around the sun in order just to sustain human life. Like I said, if we were closer, we would die because of heat, and if we were further, we would freeze. Some other ones, I'm kind of just throwing these, quickly at you guys, but they're just very fascinating, is that the way that Jupiter has its moons positioned in its orbit, it actually protects planet Earth from a lot of asteroids and comets that are coming from that direction, that if Jupiter's moons weren't there, they would hit us directly. So I think that's fascinating. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff here that we can talk about. I'll throw it over to Edgar again, see if he has any ones like these.
Yeah, of course. And there's one that we have here, that it's the right planetary mass, which allows a planet to retain the right type and the right thickness of atmosphere. If the Earth were smaller, its magnetic field would be weaker, allowing the solar wind to strip away our atmosphere, slowly transforming our planet into a dead, barren world, much like Mars. So, I mean, this is something that we do have to take as an account, because our atmosphere, it's pretty much protecting whatever it's in the outside, that it's coming inside our planet. So our atmosphere is protecting us from the radioactive waves, even from the sun. The sun sends radioactive waves of heat that could essentially damage us if we didn't have a willed protected atmosphere. So if the mass of our planet was smaller, meaning that our planet was actually smaller, then we wouldn't have the correct atmosphere to protect us from all those things that are out there in the universe, that could potentially harm us. And so this is this is something that we have to look into. And this is not something that it's variable, that it's changing, or something like that. This is a constant that we have in our planet, and so we can't just say this was something that was created by chance. And how come we're the only planet in the universe known? Of course, there's lots and lots of theories about there's other planets in the distance, way in the distance, that might contain life, but that's just a theory, or that's just a positive thinking that there might be more life out there, but there's no proof. And I think I heard this once, that it takes us, I don't even remember the amount of months, but it's months to get to Mars. It takes us quite some time. It's actually even years, maybe. And actually, I can get that quote, but yeah, it's about 7 months. So, about 7 months to get to Mars. It was a few years that it took to take to or pass the orbit of Pluto. And so we're expecting to find life in a different, let's say, in a different galaxy. Like, it's hard. It's not something that it's plausible, at least not with our technology. And I can go into say that I don't think we're ever gonna, find that. If we do, well, maybe I'm gonna be wrong, right? But it's just not plausible. The conditions are exactly like we said, like they're perfect for our universe, for this galaxy to have and maintain life in this Earth.
All right, so that was the fine-tuning argument. Now we're going to transition over to another one, which I actually don't know what the name of it is, but we're going to go and call it the argument from rationality. This one is actually, I'm going to try my best to explain it, and let's see how it goes. So we have two possibilities, either a world with God or a world without God. In a world without God, if we were somehow to even, get here, essentially what would happen is that all of what we know would be determined by randomly exploding neurons in our brain. Now, what I mean by that is, in a world where we're nothing more than just, cosmic space dust, as a result of an accident explosion that happened, there would be no real basis for consciousness, for soul, because everything would be physical, everything would be made out of matter. So everything that we know as far as thoughts, as far as ideas, in reality, all that is just firing of neurons happening inside of our brain that are causing us to have those thoughts. which means, like I said earlier, everything would be determined. And if everything is determined, then that means regardless of what we want to do, we can't actually make decisions because we're determined to do whatever our neurons feel like doing, you know? I have no control over which neurons explode or fire off electrical discharges inside of my brain. And since I have no control over that, I'm just going to follow whatever those randomly electrical shocks are telling me to do. Now, the reason this is important is because essentially, like I said, we're determined to believe, we're determined to think the way that we are. And a lot of times, atheists or unbelievers, they'll call themselves free thinkers. But if everything is determined and our thoughts are determined, then how can we truly be free thinkers if we don't even have the freedom to choose what to think? The idea of being reasonable or rational comes from examining evidence and coming to the best conclusion, deciding, okay, which one makes the most logical sense based on our worldview, based on naturalism or materialism or whatever you want to call it, which is, like I said, just the idea that everything is physical, everything is natural. There's no such thing as supernatural. There's no such thing as spirit or souls or anything like that. So a lot of times, like I said, they'll be the first ones to say, like, yeah, we're free thinkers, we're rational thinkers, but if we're just victims of random electrical impulses happening inside of our brain, then how can we truly be free thinkers? How can we truly be rational thinkers when we're determined to think what we think? When we're determined to believe what we believe? We can't even look at evidence and make a judgment because that judgment would be determined so by these random discharges of electricity happening inside of our brain. I hope I'm doing a good job of just painting what a picture looks like. You know, everything is, for the most part, many atheists that do hold to naturalism, they will accept that they are determined, that there's no such thing as free will. And that, like I said, when you look at a world that way, you really have to give up a lot of who we are as humans. For example, let's say somebody does a crime. If that person is determined to commit that crime, how is it that we can hold that person accountable for being determined to do something that they had no control in doing? Because the neurons exploding in their mind determined that they would do that. You know, and if we accept determinism, then we should have absolutely no grounds for punishing someone for just following what they were determined to do. The reason that we feel that we can hold people accountable is because we say that they could have chosen to not do what they did. You know, if someone has the choice to not have stolen and they stole, well, yeah, they should be held accountable for that. But if someone was determined to steal and they steal, well, then how can we blame them for stealing when they had no choice? But the reason this is an argument for God, although there are Christians that do believe in determinism and do believe that we don't have free will, let's just put them aside for a second because that's a actual theological discussion, not an argument for God. But let's just put that aside for a second. And let's talk about free will. When we have free will, that means that we can do something like be rational, because we can look at the evidence and we can truly make a decision based on the evidence that's presented to us, and we can draw conclusions based on evidence, thus making us rational or reasonable to believe the things that we believe. Like I said, whenever we are relying on determinism, we have no control over what we believe. We might think we do, but like I said, if you allow or you agree that everything is determined, in reality you don't, because you are programmed to believe that and you have no way of changing your mind, even if you freely wanted to, because free will just doesn't exist. But that's essentially what the argument is, that it's only under free will that we can even say something like, rationality or reason. Like I said, if we don't believe in God, we have to believe in determinism. And if we believe in determinism, we have to believe that we have no choice in our beliefs, because it's just based on the electrical discharges, impulses happening inside of our brain. But if we do have free will is something that can only be explained by a God who has given us free will, the ability to make choices, the ability, because like I said, at that point, our free will wouldn't stem from something like neurons in our brain. It would stem from consciousness. It would stem from a soul. It would stem from all these supernatural things that atheist naturalists don't want to admit that we have. So like I said, in order for us to be reasonable, we have to have free will. And in order for us to have free will, it has to come from something like, a God or God himself, because, like I said, but that itself comes from God giving us something like consciousness, God giving us something like the soul. And with those two things is how we're able to have this free will. But what do you have? Any thoughts, Edgar?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing that I could say is that I did hear that this once where somebody, said about, determinism, and the question that followed up was like, are you determined to make this question, or are you freely doing the question? And because, like you said, that takes a lot of impact whenever we're making arguments. Are we determined to do that, or are we freely doing that? Because I mean, I don't know, but I guess that's a thing we have to really think about, because there's certain things that, I mean, that we could see. Like in nature, like if you were to say that this is a naturalistic world, and we can only think of what is natural, there's a lot of things that cannot apply to that. I believe you mentioned a few, but like the laws of logic, for example, you can't weight something like that. You cannot measure. You can't do much with science with the laws of logic, and they are existent whether we, like as humans, exist or not. They're there. They're still there. Mathematics, like we were talking about just a minute ago, they exist whether we exist or not. They're there, but they're not natural. They're not something that we can, definitely that like weight or do, something like that. So, I mean, I just think this is something that we do have to look into, and not just think about the naturalistic way, because there's a lot of things that are not that natural.
No, yeah, good point. Just for anyone who wants to hear a little bit more about that math thing, I just want to say this, and you guys can think about it during your own time. But let's say there was no humans on Earth, or no humans alive anywhere, and there was 2 rocks floating in space. Would there actually be 2 rocks floating in space? Would there still be 2 rocks floating in space, even if there was no humans there to see it? And I think just by thinking about something like that, we can be like, well, yeah, there'd still be 2 rocks, 2, as far as 2, which kind of shows that something like mathematics is outside of us. It's still there regardless of what we're hearing. Kind of like you were saying, same thing with logic. If there can't be a universe and not a universe at the same time, there can't be human life and not human life, and that's something known as the law of contradiction. But it's part of logic. It's part of how we know things. And even if there's no humans on Earth, that would still be true. That something cannot be something, and also something cannot be something and not be something at the same time. So just 2 quick examples about logic and mathematics. But yeah, we went over some pretty faster than last week. I forgot to mention in the beginning that this was actually part 2 of Arguments for God. You'll probably see that in the title, but just in case maybe you're just listening to this, last week we talked about 2 other arguments for the existence of God, and these are just 2 more. We haven't made it official yet, but I kind of know where I want to go next week with this discussion. But essentially, the whole idea is just giving us good reason to believe that there is a God, that there is something outside of us, that, we're not just here by accident. We're not just some sort of cosmic accident that happened, millions and millions of years ago, but there's actually good reason to believe in something like a higher power or a higher being or, a God figure. And that it's actually not only just that we need one or that there has to be one, but it's necessary that there is one. There's this one argument that I was actually preparing to give tonight, but the truth is, it was actually kind of more. It's complicated to teach. I don't think it's complicated to understand, even though that kind of sounds like it's like a contradiction there. Because I understand what the argument is, but it's hard to explain it properly. But essentially what it does is it just leads to necessary being, that there has to be some sort of necessary supreme being at the very beginning or the very foundation of all of existence. And, once we can believe that, the question is, okay, now that we believe in some sort of God or higher power, the question is, with all the religions out there, which one has which one knows the true God, the true living God? And Edgar and I both believe that Christianity has all the evidence to back it up. Not only does it have the evidence to back it up, but it's the only religion that has the evidence to even come close to backing it up. If we were to rank them as far as top 3, I believe it'd be Christianity as number 1, and then nothing as 2 and 3. Just because all the other religions are just so far down as far as like their likeliness to be true, that it's not even close to compare to the evidence that we have for Christianity. And I know I'm making kind of a bold statement there, but I mean, when we look at the biggest religions out there, there's really no good reason to believe in the other two. And I don't want to say too much because, like I said, we could save this for another episode. But that is the next rational question that we should be asking. If there's good reason to believe in some sort of God, has anyone figured it out, or does anyone know the one true God? And like I said, I think there's good reason to believe that it's the God of the Bible, the God of Christianity. Edgar, any final thoughts here before we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, I would just like to say that it's really exciting to know that, there's a lot of these good arguments in regards to like science, to the cosmos, to the universe, things that I know a lot of people like to start, to study and hear. And so I just think this is so amazing that we have all these arguments for God that, explain that why a God is necessary. And this is not, like we've said, I believe we said this on our last episode, that this is not, just a God of the gaps argument. There's good evidence that, we're not just saying this exists because of God. No, there's evidence of why this would be existing, and why an answer would be, God. Whether, like you just said it. Like you said it in our last episode, maybe there's a lot of people that might put a different name instead of saying God, but at the end of the day, you're still agreeing in a sense that there is a higher power that had to intervene for all of this to exist. So it's just amazing. And then, like Jonah said, then all right, now we know this, and let's narrow it down and let's check out what's the nature of this God that or this higher power that you're talking about, and now what's the conditions of believing in Him? What's into believing in God? And so we got a few good arguments for Christianity, as Jonah said, and maybe my only recommendation is, maybe if you're interested in all this material, as we said, we're going to put a few links in the description box, just so that you maybe you can maybe read a little bit more, or maybe watch a few more videos over the arguments. And why not check, you can even check the counter arguments against against all these arguments for God. I don't think that hurts, but I think from there, just take the time to really analyze and check out the facts and really get to the truth. So yeah.
Yeah, you actually mentioned something very important, Edgar, that I don't want to gloss over, because I forgot about it until you brought it up, which was the idea of the God of the gaps argument. Just the reason I want to bring this up is because whenever you try giving any evidence for God, people in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube or wherever, they will always shout God of the gaps. Even if they don't know what God of the gaps is, they'll essentially explain it. And I remember one time specifically when I was talking to some people about God, he said this. He's like, you know what? I just don't like when people don't know something and they just say like, oh, well, we don't know, therefore God. And that's what a lot of people usually think that we end up doing. Is like a common example is like before we understood what thunder and lightning was, people saw it as like divine judgment from God, or that God was controlling it. And that's what kind of God of the gaps argument is, like, hey, we don't really know what's causing lightning and thunder, so we're just going to say it's God. So a lot of people, when they'll hear these arguments for the existence of God, they'll think like, oh, well, you don't really know, you're just giving credit to God. However, when it comes to God of the gaps, the thing is, we're not just saying we don't know, therefore God. We're actually giving positive arguments for why this has to be God. And when we're providing positive evidence for something, it's no longer God of the gaps. Now it's, here you go, here's the evidence. Now, what are your objections? And we'll discuss about this. You know, if we're talking about the Kalam, you can't just say, oh, well, you're just God of the gapsing it. It's like, no, here's the positive arguments for God. Now, what are your counter arguments? Where do you disagree? Let's talk about those. And when we're, like I said, when we're presenting positive arguments, it's no longer God of the gaps. Now it's actually arguments for God, which I think out of all the four that we kind of discussed, they're all positive arguments for the existence of God, and not necessarily just saying we don't know, therefore God, which unfortunately a lot of atheists think that we are doing. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is important to know.
Yep. No, yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, with that being said, guys, we really do hope that you guys enjoyed these last two episodes about arguments for God. Like Edgar said, we're going to leave some videos or some recommendations down below on the YouTube. I believe we can do it on Apple too, but I'm not entirely sure. But we'll if you really want to know about these links that we're going to share, either check us out on YouTube or check us out on our Facebook page to get all the links that we're going to share for these 4 arguments for God, because I don't think we did it last week. But it's going to be some very easy stuff. I think a lot of times one of the mistakes that I made when I was learning these is I was jumping to the hardest videos first, and I had no idea what these people were talking about, because a lot of times they'll just say big words and they'll expect you to know what these words mean. But if you don't know what the words mean, it's like they're talking a different language. So we're going to try leaving some beginner level videos for you guys and articles. But we're really glad that you guys decided to check out this video. Don't forget to share it with friends and family who you think might need to hear something like this, because like I said, we do believe it is something important, and that's kind of what podcasts are for, for sharing. So feel free to hit that share button on Facebook or anywhere else on Twitter. And don't forget that you guys can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and on our Facebook page. If you guys have any questions about objections to God, or just any questions about Christianity or the Bible at all, feel free to leave it down in the comments on our YouTube or on our Facebook, and we want to dedicate a whole video to answering those. And just let us know how we're doing. Any critiques or anything, any comments that you want to share with us, we'd love to hear them on our Facebook page. Thank you guys once again for listening to this episode. We hope to see you again next time, and take care, and God bless.
See ya.